Let's get underway. I'm going to talk a bit today about basic block development. So this course it assumes that you know a fair amount about using concrete5 on a day-to-day basis, how to use the UI to place blocks on pages and add pages and manage content using concrete5. And you may want to do a little bit more than that and actually start building out your own block types to solve different business and design challenges that you have.
All right, here we go. So we've got ourselves a basic concrete5 site, and as I'm navigating it, you're probably familiar that basically what we're looking at here with this the image up here, the nav block up here, the content in the middle, these are what we call blocks. And if I put a page into edit mode and I go around the site and actually edit the page here, you can see we can tell where blocks stop and start by actually mousing over them. And basically every self-contained whatever you're seeing here in this within this bordered region here that's been added to this area, that is one instance of a concrete5 block, and it could be different types of blocks display their contents in different ways, and that's what we call the blocks view layer, and we're going to get to how that's defined in a little while. But so there's a number of different components to a block, and so I'm going to just kind of walk through the process of adding a block to a page and break it down on a kind of sort of more granular level than you may have thought about blocks in the past. So if I decide I want to add some content to a page, and I click this button and I click add block, here we get to choose from what we call block types. So that's sort of an important piece of concrete5 naming that you should know about, is whenever we refer to a block type, that's like that determines when you're building a new block to use in your site, to look a certain way or to store a certain bit of certain types of data. What you're building is a new block type, and every different block type is a block type is basically a folder or directory full of different PHP code, and which determines how it looks, and images and things like that. So if I wanted to add, let's add some basic HTML. So when I click on this, you can see I've got an add HTML box here, and I've got a text area that's empty. I've got cancel and add buttons, and then I can type in my block there. What we're looking at here is the block's add template. So when you add a block to a page, this is the PHP template that is displayed, and we'll go through these files in a second. Up till concrete5.5, every block needed an add and edit template. This is actually no longer the case. You can add blocks without some of those templates, and that can be useful if you've got pieces of functionality you want to paste, you want to reuse throughout your site, but they don't really have any options. So here is our add template for HTML. We click add down here, and we add the block here. So this is what we call the view layer for a block, and you can see that blocks really aren't any good without a view layer. So that is one of the few things that is required for a block type, is to have a view layer, because a good rule of thumb when you're working with blocks in concrete5 is you will want to make a new block type if you're doing something kind of design-centric or functionality-centric that you want to reuse throughout the site, that encompasses a portion of a page as opposed to an entire page. There are other concrete5 constructs that you can use if you want to have complete control over the full page experience. So blocks are really for reusable, visible content on a page that you want site editors, including yourselves, to be able to manage through the CMS. So now, if I click on this block that I just added, I see edit as my as the option here. If I click edit, you can see that I pop open what looks to be just the same template as before. And it looks that way because we built it that way, but there are actually two separate templates in concrete5 block types for adding and editing blocks, and they are responsible for displaying. One is responsible for displaying just the options for new content, and the other is responsible for displaying options for content that has to be editing an existing what we call instance of a block. And those, as you might imagine, are frequently the same. So there are ways to reuse a fair amount of the make it so you don't have to duplicate a lot of work between those two things. So if we type in here and update our block and save it, you can see that we've saved that block. And then we can publish our edits. That obviously doesn't happen completely behind the scenes, or that obviously doesn't happen without some programming behind the scenes. Let's go through the HTML block here. So as you can see, we've got ourselves the add template, which we saw before. The edit.php file is the edit template, and then what we have here is probably the most important portion of a block, and we'll walk through exactly how this works in greater detail. But this is what's called the blocks controller, and we call it the controller because concrete5 block types adhere, or try to adhere, pretty strictly to what is referred to as a model view controller architecture. So there is blocks save their data in specific database tables, and we'll go through how that works in a second. And a lot of times this happens automatically, and that's the model portion of the block. And then there's a controller, which is fired up every time a block is viewed, added, edited, saved, everything, and it controls what happens when those actions occur. And then finally there's a view layer, which is how the HTML is displayed in this case. So view.php is that view layer, and there's a few other files in here as well that we can that we'll walk through. So let's go through these in greater detail. As you might imagine, the HTML block is a pretty simple block in concrete5. All it has to do is save all it has to do is save one piece of data for each block that gets added, just HTML content. And so, all it has to do is display one text area anytime it's added or edited, and just output one piece of data every time that it's viewed. So it's a pretty easy block for us to understand. And so I'm going to actually look into the database to show you sort of behind the scenes how this block saves its data and saves it in the database, and how that happens automatically without us having to do anything. So this block uses a database table called BT content local, and you can tell that because if you open up the controller.php file for that block, the BT table protected variable is called BT content local. And so what this means is anytime this block knows that it has a database table in the database that it will save its data against. And this will happen automatically since this block works that way. That's what this BT table variable controls. So you could name this anything. You just had to make sure that this table exists in your database. And the way this works is content is just the column that stores the HTML. It's long text, meaning that it's large. And BID is something that matches a block ID field in the block table. And every block database table has to have this if it's sort of the primary block or primary table for a block. So if you look throughout other block tables in the database, they all have BID. They're all integers. That's because when concrete5 saves a new block type, or saves a new instance of a block that you add to your site, it creates a block object in concrete5, gives it a number, and then saves its special data against this table. And so this is a pretty basic database table. It exists for this block and for the main content block. And you might wonder how we created this database table. We could certainly just create it using a MySQL create table query, but what we actually do more than that in working with blocks is we use what we call db.xml files. And this file is required for any block that needs to save its data in the database, which is 99% of them. This is what this file looks like for the HTML content block, or for the HTML block. It's XML, so if you're familiar with that, this should be at least something that you can read, even if you don't necessarily understand every portion of what's happening here. When this HTML block is installed, which happens automatically when concrete5 is installed, this db.xml file is parsed completely. So when you install your own block types, which we'll do in a little bit, that db.xml file is parsed completely. And what's cool about that is there are functions in concrete5 that if you change this file, and you can refresh these blocks, and it will look through this XML file again and make changes based on your changed files. So you don't have to write a lot of MySQL alter table statements and stuff like that. So here you can see we have a schema version up here. This is going to be the same for it. When you're building your own blocks, you're going to want this at the top and the bottom of your db.xml files. And then here we have a table statement. And so if I collapsed it up, you can see it's all just one statement here. And that's because I only have one database table. You can create blocks with multiple database tables. Once you do that, you have to start writing your own SQL queries in terms of saving your data, because our model view controller automatic saving of block data when blocks are added and edited only really works well with one database table. So here we have BT content local. So this is a database table. You could name this anything you wanted. It just has to match this parameter. So we could call this BT content HTML if we wanted to, as long as we named this BT content HTML. Here you can see we are defining the BID, the block ID here. This db.xml and any XML files you see in concrete5 that start with schema version 0.3, they are what is called ADO XMLS or AXMLS. And we've got links to this stuff in our developer documentation. This is a custom language created for the ADODB database abstraction layer, which is what concrete5 uses. This is just a PHP database library that we bundle, which takes care of connecting to our database, and in theory makes it so that we could work with more databases than just MySQL, although we don't actively support that yet. But this is something they came up with so that they could handle the challenges of describing a MySQL database in such a way that could be altered later and stored more easily than actual just create table statements. So that's what this is. And so this defines the BID, the integer that has to be in the blocks table. And then here we define the one column that we need to store our HTML content, and we just name that content. Again, you could name it anything. The type is X2. What that means, if you look up AXMLS, is that means long text, and they have their own special nomenclature for these types, because they don't call them long text, because we might be dealing with different databases down the line, so they kind of abstract it out to more generalized concepts. because not all databases support all the same columns. So that's what this does. This automatically gets installed and the table gets created when the HTML block is installed. So I will walk through what happens when this block is added to this page. So when we saw before, when we looked at adding an HTML block, this window pops open. You'll notice it is sized a certain way. If we look in our controller.php, you can see we have a couple different properties here. We have BT interface width and BT interface height. These are just numbers in pixels for how tall and wide the dialog box for this block should be. And these numbers are shared between add and edit interfaces. We also have this new parameter, which is new in 5.5, which is BT wrapper class. You don't have to have this. This is a little esoteric. If you do have this, your block's interface here will be wrapped in a particular CSS class. I would recommend that you do wrap it in CCM-UI, and then what you can do then is you can use Twitter Bootstrap, which is it's a user interface library that came out late last year. You can use Twitter Bootstrap to define, to style your form fields and stuff like that. And if then you can use their markup and things like that, because we use Twitter Bootstrap for our own user interface stuff, but only if it is wrapped in CCM-UI classes. That way we could sort of roll it out piecemeal to the interface. So that's what that parameter does. Again, it's not required. These are caching parameters. We'll come back to those. But really, these are just kind of interface level things that we should concern ourselves with, and that's what's making this window look the way it does. Again, since these windows are resizable and draggable, so the interface width and height isn't quite as important as it used to be. But it's nice to size your windows appropriately so people don't have to do a lot of scrolling. At this point, the entire contents of this dialog box are the add.php. And if you open this up, you can see there really isn't much of anything here. That's because, like I said before, many of these blocks share an add and edit layer. So what we've done is we include those. We include the same template for both add and edit. However, if I were to do something like this, save this, and then add HTML, you can see that my new content that is typed up here appears at the top of this. And if I do it down here, you can see that it appears at the bottom of this. Now, one interesting thing to note while I'm doing this is these cancel and add buttons and the title portion of this dialog box are not part of the add and edit templates. So these buttons are always the same. They always handle saving the data in your form. You don't have to code up the buttons. You don't have to code up the title bar. You just are responsible for the stuff in the middle of your text area. So we're going to look in form setup.html. You can see all this is a text area. And we will come back to what this does in a second. But you can see the only thing that is in this text area, or that is in this add and edit interface, is this text area. So I can type stuff in there, and I can click add. Now, one thing that's interesting is this content, this text area's name is content. So this is crucial if you want to know why your blocks do or don't save properly. We name all our form elements the same as the database columns, the columns in the one block database table. So that's key, because so what this lets us do is it tells us that the block type will automatically stick the contents of the form that match the column names in those appropriate columns for the instance of the block without you having to save anything. So the way that, so we name that text area content, and we click add, and it automatically puts the content in BT content local the way that it should. So you can see this column is the block that I just added. And how does it do that? So when I submit the form for adding, what happens is, it's interesting. When I submit the form for adding, the controller automatically calls save on the calls save for this particular block type, and it passes in the contents of that post to save. And you can see, if I didn't have, you wouldn't necessarily even need to define a save function in most cases. There are many blocks in the core that don't have save at all. This block does, and we can walk through sort of why it does. Here we this save function here gets data as its object. Data is simply the post array that comes through the form, and here we create a new array with content as its with its only value. It has to be named content because we're going to pass it to its parent function in a second. So that parent function is responsible for saving the data in the appropriate columns. But what we do first is we first ensure that data content is actually set. Otherwise, we send in a blank string. That's because certain versions of concrete5 would have problems if null strings made their way into this. It would actually save it with the 0. That was a problem with the AdoDB database library. I'm not totally clear on whether that's actually been fixed at this point. It should be, but what we did was we decided to say that any blocks like this that had content like this would always pass in a string to their parent functions. So we check to see if those exist first. Again, you don't have to have this. This is just a check against blank HTML blocks. If I remove this and save it, and I add a new copy of my HTML block, it will save it just fine. What it was doing was, if I send it through empty, now see that we probably don't even need that. We probably don't even need that code in there any longer. But what save lets you do is this automatically gets run when a block is added or edited, and it lets you pre-process that stuff. So you don't really need this for basic blocks at all. And I'll show you a block type in a little bit that doesn't even use this. But you can hook into this by defining your content here. So for example, let's say we wanted to do some mischief. If we hooked into save and did something like this, what we're going to do here is anytime, what we've effectively done is anytime we save this block, we are actually going to, we're going to make sure that this is correct. We are actually going to append some content in the saving function. So you see, I didn't actually type all that stuff in there, but when I saved it, it appended it. And it appends it in here. And of course, if I keep saving it, it's going to keep appending it, etc. So save is something that you can define in your controller file to manipulate the data that is posted in from add and edit blocks. Moving right along. when I edit this block, you can see that it loads up the content in there. That's editing a block loads up the edit.php template. You can see that our edit.php template simply includes form_setup_html.php, and it also passes through the controller object. It passes it through as a named parameter called controller obj. But I'm going to make this a little simpler for you. I'm going to just rewrite this so that it makes a little more sense. Content. That's a little bit small. Oops. Okay, so I have simplified this a little bit for you guys. So you can see just how simple this block can be. I can even remove this. This is all that has to be in this block to really in this edit template to really make it work. You can see I've got a text area. I've named it content so that when I save my block, it will save that data appropriately. It'll take care of updating blocks. It'll take care of replacing or inserting versus updating. And you can see I've got I'm outputting a variable named content here, and this is pretty key. So when you write a view template or an edit template for a block, the current instance of that block, all the columns in the database table for that block, for instance, content is the only one in this one. The current instance of that block, all that data is automatically available in the local edit and view scope without having to do anything. So you see we've got content here. That isn't just that happens, but it happens because behind the scenes, content, the variable, is retrieved for that particular instance of the block and then passed in to the edit parameter. And it's passed in using a method called set. This happens automatically behind the scenes, but you can also do your own magic with that. So let's say I've got something like header. This isn't something that we're saving with a block, so it's not going to print out. Oh, that's not a good example because that's actually a reserved. That's actually a reserved value. We'll call it header text. So here we have a variable called header text in our edit template. It's blank, of course. Content is automatically being pulled in, but if we defined in our function, in our controller, a function called edit, this is a function that will automatically run prior to the edit template being displayed. So then we call a function called header text, and we call a function named set. What this does is it will create a variable in our edit layer with the value, this is our header text, so that when I edit it, it shows this is our header text. And so that's kind of a contrived example, but it kind of shows how this stuff works behind the scenes. Anytime edit or view is run, certain variables are automatically set, but you can also set your own variables in those templates using this function. And then that's pretty much sort of the basics of how these blocks work. There's much more to this, and I'll get to that in a second. There's a couple other sort of reserved functions here. I'll go through some basic stuff that all blocks have, just so you know what they mean and why they're here. There's get block type description and get block type name. So these are functions that you should define in your blocks so that your blocks actually have a name and have a help description. So when I add a block, all of this stuff here, external form, date navigation, etc., that's the block's name. So you can see get block type name, having HTML defined there. That's how you name your block. If you go up here and click on this, you can see that there's little descriptions next to blocks. That's the block type description. And it's usually good to define, define a little helpful description for what your block does. And moving along to some of the other sort of required components of blocks, there's icon.png. This is just a 16 by 16 icon that shows up next to a block in its list. So this is not to be confused with a package, a thumbnail, or a theme thumbnail. This is just an icon that shows up when your block is being added to a page in edit mode. Another file that you'll see in blocks fairly frequently is a file called AdoJS. AutoJS is a simple way of using JavaScript to validate blocks. So, for example, if I add an image block to a page, make sure that I know what I'm doing here. Okay. If I attempt to add an image block to a page without choosing an image, you'll see I get an error that says you must select an image. This is actually happening through the AutoJS file. AutoJS is just simply a JavaScript file that will automatically load for a block anytime that block is being added or edited in the page. So this is not sort of front-end validation or anything. This is JavaScript used for a block when you're using it in edit mode. And this is the function that you would define if you wanted to validate your block in this way. And we'll talk a bit more. We talk a bit more about validation of blocks in the advanced block development class, because there are actually a few different ways to validate blocks. But this is what this file is for. CCM validate block form is the function that you can define, and if you want to make it so that a block fails for any reason, you simply call the function CCM _ add error, and you add an error into that function, and it will cancel a block from loading. And we talk a bit more about that in the advanced section, but I just wanted to make sure that you understood when you see this auto.js, that's what it's for. You can also use these files for any number of other functions. So when you're doing an image, or you're adding an image, if you select another page or external URL, you can see that our UI is changing here. That's actually happening because of auto.js. So you can add other JavaScript in here. This is simply a way to provide JavaScript that will always be loaded for your block in edit mode. So sometimes we use this for validation. Other times we use it just, if you have JavaScript that you want to make sure is available for blocks every time they're added or edited.